Hi, thank you for joining us. And because you guys came, you get free swag. See how special you are? You'll get a Virtual World Society bag, maybe a t-shirt, some pins, and that's made it worth it already, I know. I'm Dr. Angelina Dayton. I'm the Executive Director of the Virtual World Society. The Virtual World Society is a nonprofit that was started by Dr. Thomas Furness, who helped create virtual reality in the 1960s for the Department of Defense. I'm here and joined, I'll let them do their own introductions, but with Dan Blair, Brian Nevinsky, and Nathan Thomas from CN Lockheed Martin, and BSDXR. Did you follow that? I know you guys are all exceptional, so I kind of changed it up so you guys would stay focused. We're going to talk today about ethics. I have a set of questions, but I'm going to let them do introductions, and then we were supposed to be a half-an-hour panel. We're going to be an hour long, so at the end, we're going to take Q&A, and then all of you that showed up get free stuff, so thank you for joining us, and Dan will do his introductions next.
Good morning. I'm Dan Blair. I'm the CTO and founder of BSDXR. I was the CEO until I demoted myself, I guess, about a year ago when I tried to lean in on my strengths and hired a CEO. We've been around for about 11 years, focused entirely on learning and development technologies, workforce development, enterprise deployments, stuff along those lines. Usually I tell everybody that I'm the one that talks about the boring stuff, so I show up at VRTO and talk about standards and talk about insurances and stuff along those lines, but I am very active in ecosystem building and in the community. I sit on the board of directors of the Virtual World Society. I'm also chairman of the board for the Provincial Sector Council New Media Manitoba, as I am from Canada. I'm the friendliest Canadian.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Brian Nevinsky. I'm a technical fellow at Lockheed Martin, and I'm our corporate spatial computing lead. I'm also on the Science and Ethics Committee here at Virtual World Society. In a previous life, I was an educator in secondary education and college, so I try and stay pretty active there with making sure not only are we able to make things work where I work, but we're going to have people that know how to have the skills to go do that. So trying to work out in the community, making sure people are learning those things when we don't quite yet have the education standards for what we're all doing here.
Good job. Well, I'm up, right? Yep. Hi, I'm Nathan Thomas. I actually work for CN Rail. I've been in the rail industry for roughly a little over 20 years now. I'm also a second-gen railroader. My dad was 38 years, so I've been around the rail industry for a long time. I've grown up with technology, very passionate about it, so I'm in the technical training department for Canadian National Rail. We have 2 campuses, one in Chicago, one in Winnipeg. And I've started breaking into the XR world, bringing it to the rail industry that's always been very slow to adapt to new technology. So we're trying to break through and bring in new things to bring the new generation up to speed and get them training and get the practicals down so that way they can grasp it better. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you, gentlemen. So I'm an anthropologist by training, and I study the social impacts of the deployment of emerging technologies, mass adoption, large-scale deployment. And so when I think about these considerations, I think about unintended consequences sometimes. That brings us to ethical considerations. And I like to say that people fall into content consumers, content contributors, and content creators. And each of those categories have ethical considerations. As I'm consuming content, I have ethical considerations. As I'm contributing to, I have ethical considerations. And when I content create, I have ethical considerations. And when you're deploying in industry, you touch consumers, contributors, and creators. And so I want to start off this question set about the most surprising ethical considerations that you have found as you've interacted on a social level with the most surprising critical consideration that you're like, wow, if I would have known this, or somebody else, I'd like to share this story. I'll let Dan start, and then we'll go down the line of I didn't realize that from a consumer perspective, from a contributor perspective, from a content creator perspective, as I deploy in enterprise, I should have thought about this.
I mean, I'm nothing but surprises, to be honest. I had never had a real job. I started the company that I work at after graduating out of college and kind of leaned in on it. And so I've just kind of learned everything by throwing myself into the fire, I guess. And some of the most abrupt, unintended consequences that I've found in deployments was largely when working with either not-for-profits or government-related organizations, where you have to be really careful about how funding is allocated and spent, and how you put those groups together. Largely because sometimes what I'm finding is that the organizations that have either received the funding or that they're looking to spend that money, they aren't always keeping into consideration the fund component of it from the beginning. And then we run into a challenge at the end when funding gets tight, and they start trying to either deploy things that are not ready or deploy things that haven't been fully tested. And so it's that QA component that seems to fall off more often than not, and that ends up affecting the end users more than anybody else. So to save a small amount of money, a bunch of users are now unintentionally stuck using something that's either full of bugs or doesn't actually fully work or doesn't have all the integrations that should. Maybe it's a training simulator that just doesn't quite fully integrate now with an LMS, or a tool that just doesn't quite have the level of fidelity that it should, or it just simply doesn't have the runway anymore to support all of the headsets that it should, for example. So it's just missing out on the quality by not thinking far enough in the future, and then having that impact the end user on it, without that really being the intention of everybody at the beginning.
Yeah, so the unintended consequences is where I always find the ethical considerations. And so I don't expect for you to have the solution for that, but having experienced this ethical consideration, right, this critical consideration, what would you say for people who haven't experienced this yet you should do to possibly be more conscious? Because ethical considerations are, you want to always have a solution ahead of time instead of on the fly doing something and then thinking, well, maybe I shouldn't have done that, right? You want to learn from other people's experiences. So what can you add to the audience now in what you would do differently, or at least what you might consider in process?
So one of the things that we've put really in place with deployment processes now is we really advocate for our clients to have an internal advisory council. And so that could be internal stakeholders or funders or whoever's really involved in the planning and deployment of that experience, which allows us to have an open discussion from the beginning and make sure that we're actually hitting all those beats. This is especially important, I think, for organizations that are doing an XR deployment that are maybe not a huge organization or are very siloed, and there's not a lot of communication between the two, because you need to be able to pull in each of the departments so that everyone can have a say that needs to be using that solution. And if you get everyone engaged from the beginning, then I've just found that it's so much more likely that everyone's get their voice in, so much more likely that we're gonna hit all the important beats, and that at the end we're gonna have something that we can all be proud of.
And I can jump in on that a little bit too. So
Yes.
with ethical considerations, our company's real big.
We were all partying last night,
Right.
sorry.
So our company's real big about every year they make every officer go through our company through ethical decisions and go through classes to learn, And the big thing they push all the time is, if it was to get published on the front page of the paper tomorrow, how would you feel about that? So you need to always consider bringing as many people, bringing smart people around you, good people around you that will actually consider and give you those thoughts of what you might have missed. So you need to surround yourself with the right individuals to help out with that decision, so that way you make sure that you might not think of a little thing that might impact a large group. So you always want to take that into consideration.
I'm going to give the Virtual World Society plug right now. Each one of these individuals is somehow affiliated with us, either in the Science and Ethics Council or funding us or potentially funding us. I'm looking at you, Nathan. And the reason why we surround ourselves with ethical people who have had these type of experiences is because when we help out in communities that are marginalized, or maybe the community that maybe has the right ideas but hasn't done a deployment yet, if we turn to our experts on our Science and Ethics Council, or on Dan is also on our governing board, then we're able to make sure that we can provide the support that we need and focus that support so they can go from good to great. Instead of them having to seek out all these individuals come to one place, and then we can help on deployment. So if you're sitting in the audience and you're either a small organization or you have a community effort or whatever, if you come to Virtual World Society, then we have discussions like this. I think Brian, I know that Dan sits on like 5 committees a week or whatever, and we discuss the critical considerations in the mass deployment and a large-scale adoption of these converging emerging technologies, not just XR. And so when he's talking about deployment, it's not just XR, and at CNRail, it's not just XR. And so Brian, did you want to also jump into this and give us your insight?
Sure. I think one of the things, I kind of piggyback on your finance one there, but more going on the idea of ownership and IP. Early on when I started at Lockheed and you're working on projects, it's like, hey, I have a charge number, I'm gonna go do this project. And then you're not really thinking about where does that charge number go, like who owns that pool of funding, like who then really owns the thing that you're creating, are you going to then be able to reuse it again? Because if someone else is paying for something, but then you're trying to reuse it to profit on it, I'm pretty sure that's not legal, and B, it's certainly not ethical. So you do need to be careful of colors of money that you're using, and if you are overlapping things, like how is that going to impact reuse, or can you even deploy that ethically and legally? And thinking about that when a lot of us get constrained with funding, and we'll take any string of funding from somewhere just to get something done sometimes, but that may not be the best course of action, because you may then end up doing all of this work and kind of wasting these people's money because there's this joint ownership, but there can't really be sometimes. So not all money is good money sometimes. And I actually had that echoed to me by a former peer of mine at Lockheed the other day, Shelley Peterson, having a conversation.
So they gave me an iPad with questions that they wanted me to ask them, and it's like...
It only works for my face.
It totally works for his face, and surprisingly, we don't look as much alike as it seems like up here on this stage. So we talk about specifically within our industry or within our specific company, but what are some of the global impacts of the ethical work that you do, ethical considerations and the global impact of your specific work, where you say, okay, I'm setting a standard, I'm setting a precedent, or I've set something in motion, and I have to constantly reflect or be critical in my considerations and how this may affect not only my company, my industry, but those people that maybe had no part of this, but there's some unintended consequence, because I think that's really what ethics kind of surrounds as unintended consequences. Dan.
Yeah,
No, I'm not going to let you go first.
Whoa.
Nathan.
Thank you.
That's why you have me moderating.
So some of the things that impact, I mean, I'm sure there's people out here all around that you're from around the globe, different areas and whatnot. We're all the way in California. Who heard of the event that happened over in Ohio? I won't name the company, but with the rail industry that almost wiped the town out, right? It was big news, global news. So we need to look at how we impact everything around us with things that happen. I mean, some unexpected event could make like ripples throughout the whole industry. We all became in the spotlight. Every railroad became real highlighted. A lot of people learned what a hot box detector was, which I'm assuming some of you probably never heard of what that is, but it's technology that we have out there that's what failed. And that's what it actually worked how it should, but it caught the failure too late. And that made a global impact, and everybody started looking at it. Now we're having new regulations put into place. We're spending millions upon billions of dollars to meet up with the regulations. So we really got to take consideration of how we affect people. And I mean, the town actually got hurt really bad by it. And it's not the first time this happened. There was another incident way back in South Carolina that they wiped the town out because they didn't think of things that could happen. And you just got to consider everything when you're looking at all of it, how you're going to impact the small things or something might happen and what the ripple effect will be to that, and then what's going to be the consequences that come out from that too.
And so we're going to go to airplanes next, because this is, I think, but I would like to ask you to add on to that about how much is internal in your position, how much is internal within your company, and how much of it is regulation, and what's the interplay between those before we pass it off to Brian.
Let's see. So I have to write a lot of the regulations that go through to the Federal Railroad Administration and the NTSB, which is the National Transportation Safety Board. And then all our training that we do through our new individuals, we have to make sure we abide by all those regulations that come up. So we have to come up with a solution to train our people to meet the guidelines and that they understand that too. And then they've also now pushed out a new thing as of 2020 that every 3 years we have to make sure they abide by and understand those regulations. So that way we're falling in line with everything and make sure our people are trained properly, know the rules, know what to expect. So that way we can try to kind of help out with everything on there.
So it's the interplay between regulation, company responsibility, and then the individual.
Correct.
Okay, Brian, what about planes?
Mine is going to kind of take a page from my teacher past. So when we're making things, it can't all just be made by us in country here and then shipped off somewhere. A lot of our customers are international, and they want to build those skills in their own country so that they have agency and they have some ownership of what they're doing. And you can't really take that away from them. Like, we can't be the only one that are building skills ourselves, building a level of expertise ourselves. It's kind of a rising tide lifts all boats things. We're better when, you know, everybody has a better understanding of some of these engineering concepts, especially things like safety, making sure things don't fall out of the sky. And what do you need to do from like a quality perspective? What do you need to do from a sustainment perspective when things come back in for repair? So it can't just be us. And some of that is doing the right thing and ethical thing. Some of it is actual like trade laws and some of their, you know, international trade compliance and export controls. Some of it is demands and requirements from some of your customers of, you know, things need to be made, you know, there with their citizens there. But I think that level of making sure that people feel bought into what you're doing and feel like they have some ownership in the process is important. Because not only are you going to get, you know, a better response from them when you want to go suggest some sort of improvement or whatever, but you're going to have that better partnership over time, that open line of communication, because they feel they have that level of agency.
And I'm saying the human element is very important if you want ethical deployment. Well, who would have thought, right?
So I want to add on to that too, but in a different way. So for both Nate and Brian, from their perspectives as consumers of this and deploying it within their organizations, everything that they've laid down just now is all of the foundation towards getting to the point of talking to us. So up until that point, they've got their regulations, they've got their considerations, they're building the culture for training and education, workforce development, all that kind of stuff. Now they call on us, and we have to create an experience that will train the users within their organizations, have them feel part of that, have them feel agency, have them retain that knowledge. We all know the same statistics, the 80% whatever. To retain, we all pitch the same numbers. But at the end of the day, before they even get to hear that solution, they had to do that work to understand that there are regulations. Those regulations are largely written in blood. They're driven by legislation that is written by unfortunate consequences of actions that happened. So now as an industry, we create experiences to help people learn and be better at their jobs. And I like to tell people that I do it because I want more people to come home at the end of the day. So when I'm supporting the trades unions or I'm supporting whatever, I want to know that people are learning, they're coming home, and they're able to work. Now, on our end, a consideration for us as developers, from the ethical side, we have to guide our users through the process at that point of finding the right technology fit for the organization, but we have to help take into consideration how that plays out over a long period of time. So making sure that like they're not needle-nosed into one solution and tying them down to one thing where they are unable to ever move in any other direction. So I've taken the philosophy where everything that I develop content-wise is never owned by me. I build out content, and I'm paid to develop content, and it is owned by my client. They can modify it, they can redeploy it, they can redistribute it, they can put it on different headsets. We adhere to the open standards, so OpenXR, stuff along those lines to make sure that the content is as interoperable as possible. And if we keep that mentality, then we can actually deploy things that can live for a long time. And so a year ago at VRTO, I did a talk about the evolving needs of enterprise clients. Talked about a lot of points, but one of them was about XR strategy. And over the last few years, we've gone into another phase of XR where we've seen a lot more interest and adoption on the enterprise side, but a lot more organizations that just don't know how to tie that into their strategies. So they know their priorities, they know the unintended consequences of not doing the right thing, and they often have their operations strategies, their IT strategy, et cetera. We need to tie our solutions into those strategies. We're not in innovation territory anymore, we're in operations territory. And that means as organizations, we have to be ready to play ball at an operations level. So we have to be ready to deploy solutions, support solutions, and make sure that, as Brian said, ownership is clear, we understand it, and that we don't take the content and then try and flip it and try and sell it back to the clients that we're already working with, because they notice.
And to go on to that too, like, my industry as a whole is really about, like, what's the hot topic of the week. I kind of joke about it all the time. You know, something happens, they want a solution for it right then, and it's just that hot topic. But let's just say a regulation changes next week. Well, we got to be able to adapt to that and change that. And if I can't have the adaptability when we make something, you know, that's going to just make it fail right there. You got to look at a lot of this too. Do you want it just because it's cool, or do you want it because it answers a solution? You know, the new generation coming through in our training and our people coming up, they've grown up with technology, so they understand it a lot better, and that's how we're having to learn how to grasp onto that. And we have to learn to adapt to that thing and be able to change with the times with it too. So we need to be able to be flexible with answering the solution at the same time.
Yeah, I think piggybacking on both these things, being able to adapt over time and swap pieces in and out and adhering to open standards so that you're not pigeonholed into just one solution. You're seeing pushes within industry of moving to like MOSA or modular open systems architectures. And I think that's very important, of allowing things to be able to work together in an ecosystem and not just say everything's going to be mine all of the time, and realizing like there is a big world around you and people need to be able to make choices, and then they may be more willing to work with you if it is a little bit easier to push you in and out, if you have some sort of open interface that complies with some level of standard as opposed to some private proprietary thing that is never going to work with anything else. If something goes wrong with budgeting or your company goes under and they need to swap something out, what are they going to do? So it's not only thinking about like how can I, provide someone a solution, but what happens if, they need to move away from me and we need to break ties. Like, can we make this something where we can break this tie cleanly and everyone has good feelings about it? Because you may want to go do business with that company in the future. And if it was a really messy tie, break of ties at one point, like they're not going to want to do that in the future.
So I want to give a shout out to Dan Blair's talk at VRTO last year. It was an awesome talk, so go look that up. And I do want to piggyback on what Brian just said, which is the young people. Okay, you guys know these young people? Okay. Gen Z and Gen Alpha are not going to work with you if you're not flexible, if you don't adhere to standards, or if you're not ethical. So there's young people coming up, whatever we thought we could get away with in terms of ownership, if you're not playing nice, they come in with a whole different ethical lens of, at the end of the day, it's not about money, it's about the world they're trying to create. They are awesome young people, and so that leads me to my next question, which is, of course, we all need to pay our mortgage, and we want to eat, and money is a driving factor in industry and enterprise. We all know this. We have two people from very large companies. We have a small business owner, or medium business owner, or large business owner.
I don't know what I am anymore.
Yeah. And so money is something we have to consider. If we take that out of the equation for a second, how do you decide who to work with and maintain your ethical standards within? And sometimes clients are given to you, but sometimes, how do you move through a space in decisions? Because there might be people here in the audience that want to work with you or want to talk to you more, maybe create partnerships. How do you as an individual, as a company, or how do you wish your industry would move through these spaces with those critical ethical considerations of the mass adoption of these emerging tech?
In terms of vendors, a lot of times we're kind of beholden to our customers, and they have certain regulations, and for good reason. There's levels of safety or security that we have to adhere to, and if people aren't willing to play ball, especially with those two particular items, they're not willing to do self-attestation of what's in their supply chain. They're not willing to comply with certain security standards. I just can't say like things that are very sensitive, I can just hand over to you. I don't really have the trust in that. Those are my probably two biggest things, is making sure things are safe and they're secure. And then, when we're looking at the companies and we do kind of background checks, if they're generally kind of sketchy in terms of like business practices or other things like that, we will definitely shy away also. I mean, money can be a factor, as a tiebreaker between things that have relatively competing capabilities. And having a capability that's key that can solve something obviously can be a big deciding factor. But a lot of times, based on our industry, those two first things are probably our top priorities.
And what do you wish your industry would focus on when you think about ethical adoption, deployment, and the interface of emerging technologies? What do you wish they would put as the priority to make sure that your industry moves forward safely and for the betterment of society?
I think, we're seeing some of the consequences of that recently with, relatively public things in the news of there being, certain companies that have had, issues with aircraft and other things like that. And to me, when we're placing requirements on the products that we're making, having safety is our top priority, and a lot of us do, and some of us, money becomes the top priority and wanting to eke out every little bit for shareholders. And I get your business and like that's what you're trying to do, but people's lives are at stake. And to me, like a big part of my job, working within manufacturing is, quality and safety and helping to make sure that we can do that more accurately. We're going to have fewer escapes. Because it's very important to me that people survive using the products that we make. So I think having more stringent things within that definitely would be a plus. I know within the federal and government space, it tends to be very high, and as you move into the commercial space where it's more beholden to shareholders, then sometimes less so. And I kind of wish it was a little more even spread across the board.
Yeah, so to tie on to all that too is as a large corporation, at the end of the day, yes, we answer to the shareholders. So they want to see the dividends paid back on their end. So we have to answer the needs, but there's also been a big push over on Wall Street and everything like that, and I don't know how many of you guys pay attention to that and look at it, but ESG, right? Environmental sustainability and governance. That's a big push in the industries and corporations now. So how do you impact the environment? How are you going to look at that? What's your sustainability of your people and personnel? And then the governance, are you complying with the government regulations? So we all have to answer those questions too. A lot of people, they see the names, they see Lockheed Martin, CN Rail, Ford, Target's here, a lot of other big names, right? But they do have a long history behind them. So there are some of the companies out there that are startups that have made big bucks that just want to throw dollars out there. And yeah, people try to grasp onto that. There's a reason some of those other companies have been around a long time is because they weigh the options, they look through everything before they make that decision and throw out the big dollars that everybody looks for, right? So we don't want to become Polaroid or Blockbuster. You want to have that sustainability. So before you dive into it, we have to answer to all those needs before we make the decision to go forward. So it might be my industry as a whole is very slow to adapt. They've been using, I still have 1940 technology out there working, and the technology's kind of going, oh, we got to wait and we got to look, we got to research. But the generational change is happening. PTC was a big push in the regulation that we had, positive train control. It revolutionized. We started bringing in microprocessors. It was one of the largest endeavors in North America, money-wise, that is undertaken ever. And then you can look it up, like multiple billions upon billions of dollars all the railroads put into this. So we're learning to adapt to new technology. We're learning to grasp that and move with the times. But we have to answer all those, the ESG, our shareholders, things of that nature, before we can move forward on a lot of things.
And make sure all those towns you've traveled through are safe and the people are happy and thriving.
Correct.
Yeah. Dan?
See the smoke rising off his head?
Oh, well, I was still kind of processing the question earlier about how you like identify an ethical partner. And so I'm kind of still in that mindset, so I want to talk about that. I think that from the service provider perspective side of things, you see a big name at a conference and you're like, oh, I want to meet them. I want to do my 1 hour. So I send them an email and say, hey, let's sit down for an hour. I try to, instead of that, because understanding that like enterprise clients are generally not either, well, they may be the decision maker, but by the time they can make a decision, you have to jump through so many hoops to get into their procurement process and verify your insurances and get a master agreement in place and all kinds of stuff before any decision can ever be made. It's better to just be a cool person. And so when I meet with like someone that I hope to work with one day, I try to just like be chill, which sounds silly in an enterprise talk, but just make sure they meet everybody that they need to meet and make sure that they feel like they're part of the community, especially if they're just exploring this industry for the first time. So meeting an enterprise client that may just come to AWE, they've never been to a VR conference, they're interested in the technology, et cetera, like the last thing that I think that I've heard from many people that they want is to just be bombarded with random meeting requests to be pitched over and over and over again. Largely because like very rarely are you walking away from a conference with a signed deal. And I say rarely because I know there's edge cases.
So to kind of touch on Dan's point there too, the big thing is I've heard the stats 100 times over when I've been talking to different developers around here. We've heard it 100 times over 100. What differentiates you from the rest? What's the wow factor? What are you going to do different than the other studio or this person or the other one? I want something that's different. I don't want the same cookie cutter over and over. I want the new stuff coming out. I want to see what makes you different than the other person.
And in that regard, like what makes you different from that other person in regards to me and my business? So if you're coming and pitching me on something or, pitching, anyone on this, do your homework first, because if you're saying like, look at what I have, and you don't have a use case that has anything to do with me, or you haven't looked at any of the things that I do in my business or any of the products that we sell or any of the concerns that we have that are relatively public out there for most businesses that are pretty easy to find in a couple Google searches. If you're coming and talking to one of us about that without doing any sort of research first, we can tell inside of a few seconds, and you're not going to get a call back. And it just comes off as dishonest, that you're coming and trying to sell something without caring for what a need is.
I was going to say, I have a lot of compassion for people in the industry right now. A lot of people have been laid off. A lot of people are starting their own ventures. People are, I don't want to say desperate, but they're looking, and I understand that, right? And those are usually the points where our ethics or our better judgment go out the door, because we have a car payment next month. And I think that's really where, as an anthropologist, I see companies or individuals having those critical considerations of, would I do this because I need the money? Or would I take that risk because I'm afraid I'm going to lose my job, right? And this industry, especially over the last couple of years, I think characters have been revealed. What your character is has been revealed. And so I have empathy for those people that are approaching you saying, I really need this, but I think you're giving great advice. And this comes back to that idea of ethics and character. And go ahead, Dan. Oh,
yeah, no, I was just thinking, because it ties into what Brian was saying earlier with the idea of ownership and also the idea of breaking up if you have to. The ultimate litmus test of your ability to operate ethically is when your project has run out of funding and you have to cancel the project and you don't know who owns what. So how do you have that conversation? How do you conduct yourself during that? Because we've all been there, and I'm sure that some of you people own businesses. We all have a special club. We've all at one point made a payroll on our credit cards, right? We've all been in these situations, but like, it isn't until you're in a scenario where your entire livelihood is wrapped up in one project or one major project that is imminently going away, and you're trying to do anything you can to try and save it, that you now have to like really, really look inwards to make sure that you're preserving your relationship and the ethical processes that you should have in place when you're talking to clients like this. Because down the road, this is going to grow. Like we always say we're at the beginning of the XR industry. We're at least at the third beginning in the last current phase, I guess. But there is more adoption. Like we all have more customers. We all have bigger deployments, and it is growing. But at the same time, money is always tight. And so that creates such a strain on how people operate. And like, it is insane to me what I've seen in this industry over the years of what people have just kind of walked away with assuming they own. And it never ends nicely.
Yeah, I mean, that's companies big or small. You have to account for that. Like, we're relatively large as an enterprise, but still the customers are beholden to when programs run their course and go away and things move on to a new generation of technology that may go to another company. We still need to play nice and ethically with our customer, who may be the U.S. government or someone else, because we're still going to have to try and work with them in the future. And if we're not following an ethical standard, they're not going to work with us. In fact, there are regulations where, in some cases, we may be disbarred from working in that portion of the industry. So there are even like ethical regulations, tied to some parts of the industry. So if you're not following those, it's not just that people may not want to work with you, but they may be forced to not work with you.
You got to think about a lot of that with the decisions too, because let's just say like people hear Lockheed Martin, they think planes. We're one of their customers too. We actually buy their stuff for our engines that run our leader program on our engines that run our trains. So as big as industries are and the world, I mean, especially you guys in the tech sector, you guys all talk, you network, you know each other. Word gets around fast. As big as everything is, the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, right? We can all link back. Word gets out. And if you're doing unethical things or you're making the wrong decisions, you're going to find that it's not going to go well at the end of the day, because people are going to talk and ask. Just from the groups that I have that come through my facility, I gave 34 different tours last year of different groups, governors, congressmen, colleges, other railroads. They all came through, and when we started showing that, hey, we're pushing into VR, XR, and looking at things, I've got a lot of individuals reaching out now, hey, what are you doing? What are you looking at? Hey, can we talk and we keep in touch, because we're interested in going into it too. We want to know your struggles, who you're working with, and what's going on. So as big as the globe is, it's very small.
I think you made a good point earlier also, Nathan, that every 3 years you're having these talks about considerations of safety, considerations. And I think being here in talks like this and saying, oh, I'm listening, now I'm going to consider ahead of time what I might do, makes you less reactionary in the moment when there's a lot of pressure, and you can say, this is who I want to be, this is what I plan to present myself as in those spaces when it comes down to money, or am I going to fund the project myself, or am I going to cut ties, or am I going to choose to be kind? Not just because it's the right thing to be kind, but because they might be a customer again later on, or they might go tell other people that I'm a jerk and I want people to think I'm nice and I want to work with them. And all these things are before you go off on somebody because you're in the moment, right? And so these are, being here and considering it, I think, is really important. So we have about 15 minutes left, and so I was going to open it up to Q&A. And also I have swag, so don't leave. I'm going to give you all swag. So are there any questions for the panel?
Or statements, and they don't actually have to be relevant.
Yeah, if you're entertaining, you can
You
take
just
the
wanna-
mic as long as you want, but you better be
If you just want to
entertaining.
throw stuff at us, feel free.
It's a dunk tank. Like, yeah. Awesome. My name is Lex. Great presentation. And AWE Enterprise is one of the things that really separates this conference, and it almost drives the industry here. You guys mentioned there's a slew of developers here, and they're all looking to kind of enter this area. You really mentioned, like, do the research before they would approach you. Can you help us out a little bit, and not so much as like, kind of give us what your short-term problems are that you would be looking to have solved by developers, and give us some insight. Short-term, long-term. Maybe like if we're here next year, what should we have that would impress you? Because you guys are very much on the forefront of technology. You know what's out there. What would you like to see that you haven't seen, or what can I show you as a developer that would be like, yeah, I'll get a call back?
Great question. I also want that answered.
I can show you some stuff. My name is Lex.
Yeah. So if you think about the traditional engineering tools that we end up having to use and where we need to tie that into real-time 3D systems, a lot of times there's like crazy proprietary formats you need to convert through, and you need to have like integrations through all of these different systems. And sometimes you're worrying about like, am I duplicating data where I don't need to, and should I be having pointers to different places? So a lot of the thought of how do I integrate into a lot of the common tool sets that go along with these, rather than look what I can display, right? Because anybody can display a lot of this stuff anymore. That's what we all do, right? We all have a niche in how we experience a lot of these things. And how is that really setting you apart from most of these other people? But for me, it's trying to get it into my ecosystem, where I may be having to work with various CAD systems or PLM systems or MES systems or ERP systems. I may have to work it into a relatively secure, complex network that's proxied and firewalled out the wazoo. It's going to have to work with various potentially custom or self-signed certificates. It's going to have to be compliant with various federal laws from a security standpoint. So if you think about DFARS and FedRAMP and all of those things that are out there, we have to comply with those because of who our customer is. So then whoever we work with has to kind of comply with those things. There's also executive orders that come out periodically on things about privacy or about security. And if you haven't even thought about those things or how you would apply them to what you're doing, then I don't know that I want to have a conversation. But if you come to me and you've already done the homework on what our industry is and what the controls are, and how we need to integrate with things, rather than here's this flashy thing where you can see things. It's like, that's great. I saw that from 100 people this week. But if you can show me, hey, I took the time to understand like what the problems are that you have to go through, and I'm willing to help you get through those problems. Like, that's what I care about.
Just like Brian was saying too, if you just Google it, look at what an industry problem is of the one you're talking to, or just even reach out. And I told you, we had 34 groups come through last year, say, hey, I'd like to come see your facilities. Majority of the large corporations have training facilities. Hey, can I come check out your training facility? How are you currently training your people? And then think of the solution to what they're training their people. I can find another way to do that. The big push that I get from a lot of my uppers when I was starting to get into the XR stuff is we don't want to take away from hands-on. We still want our personnel to put their hands physically on it, and we want to see them do the task. But if I can instill and put the procedures in place behind that and have them practice the procedures and get them down and understand that before they go out and put their hands on it, great. That way they understand what they're needing to do. So you need to just look at what an industry problem is or the way they're training their people, and then think of a solution to that and be like, hey, I've checked out what you guys do. I've seen that you guys have been having an issue like, planes losing a door, so let's look at how we can secure those doors a better way, right? Not the Lockheed Martin.
That wasn't Brian's company.
Has nothing to do with Lockheed Martin, just for the record.
Yeah. I would also say this, we're saying Google it or whatever. You should know about the company, you should know about their problems. But you need to know, especially, little older developers, that those young developers, those Gen Z and those Gen Alpha developers, they have been cyber stalking people for years, since they were children. So they know Brian's daughter's first name. They know where Nathan went on the Disney cruise. And so they're coming in with personal information. Privacy's not a thing. Come to my TED Talk. That was it. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Privacy's not a thing. And so they know that his boss has just left, or that Nathan's company is not in Ottawa anymore, or whatever, because somebody, when they were 14-year-old, liked their boyfriend's Snapchat post, and then they found out everything about that person. Like, they're cyber stalking. And so if you're not doing your research, you're competing against people that really know everything that's out there and are personalizing the pitches to people. And so you better, doing your homework is, hiring that 14-year-old girl to find out everything.
I actually had
Faster.
one of the best CEOs gave me a comment back when I was first coming into management, when I started on the railroad. And he said to me, "I'm your only customer. I don't care about your other customers. I'm the most important." And it stuck with me throughout that. It made perfect sense to me. Like, you go out to a restaurant, do you care about the other tables, or do you care about the service you're getting at your table?
Again, validating. That 14-year-old girl wants to think that they're your only customer, right? And so you have to know how to, like, really, really, really speak to them as humans, right? I want to know about you too, right?
Awesome. We're going to go to the next question.
Hi, thanks for the great panel here. Dylan Fox with XR Access. I'm really curious, when it comes to accessibility, there's still a lot of challenges around virtual reality, especially for people with low vision or with mobility impairments. So what have been the attitudes that you've seen in industry with regards to accessibility for these emerging technologies? And what kind of suggestions would you make in trying to improve that?
I've spent a lot of time exploring accessibility options. Everything from, I've got 3 or 4 3D rudders on my shelf in my studio, if you guys remember those. Different locomotion methods like cyber shoes and stuff along those lines, but also accessibility in the sense of when you deploy the content, you can't be beholden to a network connection. It's just like, that's an accessibility thing, right? Like, if I give Nate 25 headsets loaded up with an experience and they have to take it to like a training experience in the middle of nowhere, it cannot need to call home. It simply will not work. They won't be able to use the solution. I have found that in the last few years, my clients that I'm speaking to about accessibility concerns have become way more open to it. But what I'm finding is that accessibility standards have not caught up to XR yet. And so a lot of the grant funding, a lot of the funding sources and grants that organizations use to get their first step into the space, and I'm Canadian, so I'm maybe throwing Canadian grants out there, but a lot of the culture and heritage stuff from like the federal government is leveraged by enterprise clients for marketing. It helps them hit their various targets so that they can make sure that they get all of their own metrics to be as green and excessive and inclusive as they need to be via marketing. And that's a completely different talk than this. However, the grant process usually has some sort of requirements for like accessibility, but it's usually like web standards. So like web readers need to be able to read it and stuff like that. None of that applies in VR world. It kind of does in WebXR world, but it doesn't work. And so there's an attitude towards implying or implementing accessibility and including everybody, but there's challenges in the funding sources that make it nearly impossible sometimes. And so to circumvent that, we often have to create an accessibility option. So, and that usually is just like a course or something that can be read with like an e-reader that runs alongside the experience, or we'll have a facilitator guide that helps add accessibility options. But as designers, when we're creating our experiences, we need to make sure that we're including people that can't use it. And so maybe that means, and this may be a taboo word to say here, but we make a flat game to go along with the VR game. Now, that also creates a challenging discussion because you can't just make 2 versions, right? There's costs associated to that. So then you have to communicate that to the client. So it is an evolving area. To summarize, I've put a lot of effort and a lot of consideration into it. And I do see more consideration coming from clients. It is the standards forums, mostly at and I'm really only thinking about like Canada, US, maybe UK, but at the like granting level, it's usually the accessibility standards that are behind. They haven't caught up to us yet.
Yeah, I think user experience just in general, probably a big thing that needs to be worked on in industry. There's, as you mentioned, not really any sort of set level of standards right now, and we're seeing a big evolution in various types of feedback, whether it's haptic, we've even seen smell feedback, audio, visual, and in web, for example, like a button is a button all the time. It may look a little bit different, but it's going to work the same all of the time. In VR, something as simple as a button can work 70 different ways. And so until you start to standardize on some of those things, it's really difficult to standardize on how are you going to make accessibility options for some of those things, because there's already so many permutations of things for people that are, of certain abilities or have certain life experiences. Because we get into also, like, people have affordances for things that they came up with that they understand, and making a transition into some of this technology. You see some people more intuitively are like, hey, I can do all of the hand gestures, and some people have a really hard time with it. Able or various levels of disability, they may have a problem with it. And so we need to know, A, what that standard is, and then B, are there acceptable levels of accessibility? So if you're talking like your hand gesture, is that something that you could do with an eye tracking? Is that something that you could do with like a button if you can't necessarily move an arm? But we need to scope out basically what are going to be our kind of common interaction patterns first, so that we can start to understand what will be our accessibility patterns to make this something that's a technology that's available to everybody.
And a big thing we need to look at too is end user experience, right? Humans as a general, we get in our own little bubbles, and it might be easy to you, but is it easy to the other user? My industry, we have a lot of skill trades. I still have people that come through that can't read. It is what it is. So I need to know that I can make it ease of use for every person. And a lot of times, like Dan touched on, I do go to remote locations that I don't have internet access. So to have to download or have it, I have to have them set up to go beforehand. I can't have it trying to call home to check up or do a checksum, and I have to have it easy to go. Another thing we kind of look for on some of the programs we've developed too is backward or forward compatible. Can we bring it all the way down to a cell phone? Because pretty much everyone has a cell phone now. So can we kind of get them that user experience in their hand and bring it then all the way up to immersing them into VR, XR, right? So we got to look at all those things, and like I said, end user experience is the big thing. So look at the lowest common denominator and try to develop toward that.
I really liked the question about the accessibility standards, but you're already our friend. But I think that, from the virtual world society standpoint, we would like to talk more about that.
Yeah, Dylan, love you.
Hang out
I
later.
would say when we talk about standards, we talk about general population, and that's kind of dangerous because the diversity is where our strength is. And when we talked about advisory boards, whenever you're building anything, you need an advisory board that represents your end user and the diversity of your end users, because then they're able to inform. When content creation gets in the hands of the end user and not in the hands of large studios, when we begin to become our own content creators, not just our contributors or content consumers, then you'll see groupings of people with similar desires for their end user experience being able to meet the diversity of their own needs, wants, and desires, and then we'll finally be able to create the things especially for us. When we deal with standards, we generalize too big, and there's always what I consider the regeneration of the power structures from before and the exclusion of people that aren't at the table and don't have a voice. But when you're your own content creator, your voice is what's creating your future for you, and that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the diversity in the advisory groups while it still stands with them, and then the content creation for the individual so that I can make sure that my diversity is the thing that I'm creating for myself. And that's the real power and agency that stays with the end user.
Got another question here.
I really appreciated that question. The adoption and just talking about how to kind of make people excited, engaged, and kind of push forward sustainability as far as like having people interested who are more traditionally trained and might be averse to the new technology. That's kind of like a very interesting topic, I'm sure, and maybe we don't have enough time to really dive too deeply into it, but I would love to talk with you about that. I'm Alicia from Transfer, by the way.
I was thinking about that earlier, and I'm like, how are we gonna fit this in? One of the things I really wanted to say is, and I assume all of you have been around as long as we all have, and we're probably all still suffering from those enterprise Google Cardboard deployments we did back in like 2014 and 15 and all that jazz. I got PTSD from that stuff, and that wasn't sustainable, and it just simply like it left. I think it was good for getting people interested in VR. So I think it had a place, and I do have a soft spot for 3DOF content, and I'll never forget going through airport security and taking 15 phones out of my pocket before flying to the far north to do a youth engagement.
He has big pockets.
But yeah, I always usually wear my cargo shorts for that. I haul a lot of cargo. But one of the, and Palmer said it yesterday, and Tom did as well, at one point, where it's like people use the technology, they want it to make their experience better, but and Palmer specifically said this, not everyone uses their headset every day. Not everyone uses their headset every week, not every month even, right? But we need them to come back. And so the experiences that we create, especially on the educational and training side, they still need to be engaging. You still want to be better for being in it and enjoy your time in there. We're going to retain more by having fun than just sitting through a boring thing, right? So I try to take into consideration that if there's a thing, I can pick it up and throw it. And making an experience that sticks, that is effective but also engaging, brings people back. So you get that engagement, and then the organization can actually be happy. But I can't get there without getting the buy-in from the associations to create those working groups, so that way we can take those long-term considerations in place. So if we're just building a thing that's like a one and done, it's going to fizzle out. If we're taking a 5-year strategy in mind, then we can build something that matters.
We talk about trust, and then play, and then utility, because that's how we learn as children. That's how we learn in all immersive environments. First, we're able to trust the person that's deploying or creating the situation for us. Then we get to play, where we get our agency, and then comes the utility. People jump to utility. That's not sustainable. We have 49 seconds left.
Yep.
You want to jump
I just
in?
wanted it real quick, too. Yeah, so people make a judgment on you in the first 15 seconds. It's the
Yeah.
same way with anything they're going to use. How many times have you heard someone go, I don't want to try it because I tried it 5 years ago and it
Yeah.
sucked? It's changed. We got to get them back into it. How can I throw that headset back on you and get you to try it again? You want to bring them back. And another real quick topic, we missed out, and I think we got to bring in one of the automobile manufacturers next year so we can call it Planes, Trains, and Automobiles.
We did.
I am strongly, we will submit the talk immediately.
We can get
Okay,
over
we have
that.
15 seconds left. Go to virtualworldsociety.org and become a member. I have swag up front. Please come get your free swag. And thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Also, if you're interested, we do run all kinds of committees. We've got a lot of engagements. We'd love for you all to be involved, so reach out to us, get involved. We only have power in numbers, so let's all push together and make this industry great.
Thank you.
Well done. Give them one more round.